Welcome, and thank you everyone for tuning into our latest Economic Outlook report, with a focus on emerging global economic indicators most impacted by COVID-19. This conversation is taking place on Monday, March 30th, 2020. Please welcome Prevadary's Chief Economist, Andrew Duguay. Andrew, thank you for taking a moment from your hectic schedule to share your insights on the rapidly developing economic challenges resulting from this health crisis.
Thank you, Nicole. Today, we're going to be shifting our focus here a bit to talk about how the economic outlook is rapidly changing, not only for the Northern Hemisphere, where the coronavirus first started to spread from first Asia to Europe and then North America, but now we are seeing the global pandemic really take hold in many places that initially were hoping to be a little bit more protected from the virus because they're in a warmer climate, or in the Southern Hemisphere, which had different seasons than the Northern Hemisphere. But this seems to be the case where this is really spreading globally, and so now we need to be thinking about the economic ramifications on an entirely different scale. So the rate at which this has turned into a global pandemic has really been quite accelerated. And to put this in some perspective, if we were just sitting here talking 4 weeks ago, we would have only seen 10 countries, mostly isolated to Europe and in Asia, that would have more than 100 cases of COVID-19. And that quickly started to escalate, but it is still escalating right to today, where we're looking at over 100 countries now have at least 100 cases of coronavirus. And that 100 threshold has really been the kind of tipping point where you start to see exponential spreading of coronavirus if a country is not very careful, particularly in the first few days of crossing that 100 cases threshold. Because the coronavirus spreads so easily and quickly, this puts a lot of different countries at danger. And as we start to think about the ramifications of this, mostly we've been dealing with either countries that have some experience with virus pandemics, such as in Asia, and so we've had a number of different responses, swift in nature. But also other countries that may have been slower to respond initially in Europe and in North America, but do have great financial resources to help tackle the problem, and lots of well-developed hospital infrastructure, which still is threatened to be overloaded, but at least they have that infrastructure in place. Now, as we're talking about this virus spreading to more and more emerging markets, I think this brings up some additional concerns on these already sometimes fragile economies. How are they going to be able to handle the spread of the virus in their markets? So when we look at the number of cases, you've seen this slide before. We've talked about how the United States and Germany and other countries have this kind of exponential curve to the number of cases, and you can follow that trend. Well, now I wanted to put the United States and Germany in there as sort of leading indicators for some new countries that have crossed into the threshold of rapidly increasing coronavirus cases. And you can see how we laid over here the fact that India, Brazil, South Africa, and Mexico all saw their pandemic start later than the United States did, to the tune of about 2 or 3 weeks. But they are following a similar trend when you look at the number of days from the first day that they had more than 100 cases. So this means that if they continue to move on a similar trajectory, their economies are going to face the increasing need for social distancing, shutdowns of non-essential businesses, and a very strong government response in order to keep their economies from plunging into a downturn. Of course, this has a number of challenges in developing nations, which might not have the ready infrastructure or quick responding government that may be needed in case like this. So we bring this to your attention because many of our customers certainly deal in business on an international scale. And we were hoping that this was initially more of a Northern Hemisphere type of economic crisis, which still would make for a global recession all on its own. But now that we're introducing more and more countries to this health crisis, obviously more and more lives are at stake. But there's also more and more risk to the global economy as well. So again, the severity and magnitude of the downturn is very hard to predict for any individual country based on their response, based on the local health conditions. But as we do look at terms of economic risk, I would say there's elevated economic risk in all of these countries. I think for the most part, we are expecting a global recession with most countries seeing year-over-year decline. Having their own health crisis on top of the reduction in global trade certainly will only accelerate some of that weakness. When we look back to the origins of this health crisis, it really started to spin off as its own financial crisis when the price of oil started to plunge, going from $60 being traded at the beginning of the year down to around the $20 that it is today. That has already impacted a number of countries around the world who depend on oil and natural gas and commodities to fund their government. And when you see oil take a crash like it has, that has severe negative economic ramifications for many countries, and particularly many emerging markets who depend on those natural resources for a large share of their economic growth. So not only have we seen the negative ramifications of just the lack of being able to drill and export or produce substitute goods, like in Brazil, growing corn for ethanol, which now is less attractive given the lower prices of oil. What we also see is that during a global recession is that there's this traditional flight to safety, and that means normal traded currencies tend to start to shift towards the largest traded currencies around the world. And this means a lot of focus on the US dollar, as well as additional focus on the Japanese yen and the euro. And so what we've seen is that already many countries have faced a large financial crisis in terms of just simply their exchange rates. And here we're looking at the change in abroad trade-weighted exchange rates for different countries, and this is the change from January 1st to today. And so the United States, when you look at its currency compared to a broad basket of currencies around the world, it has improved 9%. This helps mitigate inflationary pressures. This helps stabilize trade in the United States and keep its economy afloat. But what we see is that the ramifications of this are on the other end for all those currencies that have had shown severe weakness, not only against the dollar, but also against the euro and other trading partners in their currencies. And what we can see is that many countries are facing crisis type levels with double-digit declines in their currency since the beginning of the year. So what we're really faced with is a lot of economies are going to struggle on multiple folds. So one, from a jobs and economic opportunity standpoint, with weakened currency, lower commodity prices, and weakened trading partners to the extent that they rely on manufacturing and exports in order to keep their current account balances in check. And then there's the health crisis on top of this. As these countries move through that phase where this is somebody else's problem to our own problem, they have to make the hard decisions. Do I shut down businesses? Do we shut down schools? How do we reduce normal economic activity so that people don't get sick? And that only will exacerbate an already fragile economic situation when you see the declines in the currency valuations, as well as the commodity price declines. So when we take this outlook as a whole, we think that the nature of this is truly global. It's a global recession, and this is going to have some pretty challenging circumstances for a lot of countries on this list as we look to the out months ahead. So as this situation is developing, we're going to continue to monitor not only the health and well-being of the United States, in not only health metrics, but in the economic sense, but we're going to increasingly turn our attention to many of these other countries which are experiencing some fragility right now that you see here on this list. We will continue to keep you updated as the economic ramifications of the coronavirus continue to spread throughout the globe. We know information is changing daily. We're seeing some, positive unified reactions from governments and global organizations to help mitigate the crisis. However, we do know and acknowledge that part of this business cycle is that we're all going to see a very different world over the next 3, 6, 12 months from now because of this. And so as we continue to monitor for signs of recovery or areas where we see increasing concern, we will continue to keep you updated. Utilizing our software and our database of 3 million plus indicators in order to keep tabs on the situation as it's unfolding daily.
Thank you again, Andrew, for taking the time to provide your insights on this growing global impact due to the coronavirus health pandemic. That concludes this economic update for Monday, March 30th, 2020. Our thoughts are with all of you and your families, as well as the many scientists and healthcare providers working through this health crisis. If you have any comments or questions for us, please feel free to reach out to me directly.